All right, you sick fucks. Welcome back to the deep dive.
Oh, are we calling our listeners sick fucks now?
Only the best, most dedicated listeners, right?
I guess so.
And they're the ones who wanted us to explore some seriously fucked up shit.
Right.
So today, we're diving headfirst into the world of fascism.
Excellent choice.
Strap yourselves in, because this is going to be a wild ride.
It certainly is a wild topic.
You wanted to know about fascism, and I've got a stack of sources here that are going to blow your mind.
I can't wait to see what you dug up.
And I'm sure with your expertise, we can really make sense of this mess.
That's the plan. I'm here to help you all sift through the wreckage of this twisted ideology.
Wreckage is a perfect word for it. Let's cut the crap and get down to the nitty-gritty of what makes this whole fascism thing tick.
Sounds good to me.
So what the hell's fascism anyway?
Well, it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
It's more than just a bunch of angry dudes with bad haircuts throwing a tantrum, right?
Well, the bad haircuts might be debatable, but you're not far off with the anger and tantrums.
So we're on the right track.
Fascism is this nasty, far-right ideology that revolves around a few key things.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, you've got a strongman leader, a real asshat in charge, calling all the shots.
So like a dictator.
Pretty much. Then you've got this insane obsession with the military.
Makes sense. Got to have a big stick to enforce all those rules, right?
Exactly. And then there's the delusion that their nation is the best, most powerful, and most deserving.
Ugh, the classic, my country is better than yours. Bullshit.
You got it. And anyone who disagrees,
Don't even want to know.
they get crushed.
Brutal.
It's all about the nation or race above everything else.
Sounds a lot like racism to me.
Well, that's often a big part of it. They take nationalism and inject it with steroids, turning it into this toxic belief that justifies violence and oppression.
So it's like, my country's the best, fuck everyone else. Cranked up to 11.
Exactly.
Okay, starting to see why you called this shit fucked up.
Yeah.
But where the hell did this even come from?
Well, it's not like some evil mastermind just cooked this crap up in a lab one day.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
It's messier than that, but the origins of fascism are pretty damn fascinating.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It basically sprung up in Europe after World War I.
Interesting. What was it about that period that gave rise to this ideology?
Well, think about the state of the world back then. The war had just ripped everything apart.
Makes sense. It was a pretty traumatic experience for everyone involved.
It created this massive, powerful state.
War tends to do that.
Blurred the lines between civilians and soldiers.
Yeah, total war and all that.
And left everyone craving stability.
Yeah, after a war that massive, I bet people were desperate for anything that looked like a solution.
You got it.
Even if it came from a bunch of asshats.
And that's where the fascists saw their opportunity.
So they basically swooped in and took advantage of the chaos.
They swooped in, exploiting that fear and chaos.
Opportunistic little shits, weren't they?
They promised to make their nations great again, through force and unity.
Whoa. That make their nations great again line sounds eerily familiar.
Yeah, that phrase has been repurposed over the years.
Definitely brings to mind some modern day asshats.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves,
Right.
but let's get specific.
All right, let's talk about Mussolini.
Ah, yes, Benito Mussolini.
Was this Mussolini dude like patient zero for this whole fascist plague?
Well, he was certainly one of the most prominent and influential figures in the early fascist movement.
Okay, tell me more.
Mussolini and his gang of thugs, the black shirts, are definitely a textbook example of how this shit takes root.
The black shirts. Sounds like a bunch of edgy teenagers.
They weren't teenagers, but they were definitely thugs.
So what did they do?
They used violence and intimidation to seize power in Italy.
So basically a bunch of bullies who threw a tantrum until they got what they wanted.
Pretty much.
And I bet they were masters at rewriting history to make themselves look good, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Give me an example.
Take the March on Rome, for example.
Okay, I've heard of that.
They spun it as this heroic, patriotic takeover.
So what really happened?
In reality, it was more like a mob of goons strong-arming their way into power.
Classic bullshit. Rewrite history to make yourself look like a hero, even though you're just a power-hungry asshat.
That's the fascist playbook in a nutshell.
But let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. What are some of the most messed up, disturbing features of this whole fascist ideology?
Oh boy, are you ready for this?
Hit me with it. Don't hold back.
All right, first, we've got that extreme nationalism on steroids we talked about.
Right, the whole my country's better than yours thing.
They take normal national pride and twist it into this toxic belief that their nation is superior to all others.
Sounds dangerous.
It is. It justifies violence and oppression against anyone they deem inferior.
Yeah, we touched on that. What else makes these fuckers tick?
Then there's the whole cult of the leader thing.
Oh yeah, that's a classic dictator move.
Fascist leaders cultivate this godlike image of themselves.
So they're basically narcissists.
Often, yes. They demand absolute obedience and worship from their followers.
So like a bunch of brainwashed sheep blindly following a narcissistic dictator. Sounds like a blast.
That was definitely not a party.
What else?
And don't forget the militarism and violence.
Right, they love their guns and their tanks.
They glorify war and see violence as a necessary tool to achieve their twisted goals.
Makes sense, considering they always play the victim and act like the whole world is out to get them.
They're all about dominating and conquering others.
Anything else?
Oh yeah, they're total control freaks.
What do you mean?
They want to micromanage every single aspect of life, from the economy and education to what you do in your own damn home.
Damn, that's some seriously creepy shit.
It's like they want to turn their country into a giant prison camp where everyone follows their fucked up rules.
Yeah, they want to suck all the joy out of life and replace it with fear and obedience.
It's about eliminating individual thought.
But I gotta ask, is it true that fascists were all about free markets?
You hear that a lot, right?
Some people try to tell me that, but it sounds like total bullshit.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
So it's not true.
While they love to bash communists and pretend to be pro-capitalist, fascist economics were a different beast altogether.
So what the hell was it then?
It wasn't pure capitalism.
And it definitely wasn't communism.
Right. They had this system called corporatism,
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
where the state and big businesses basically became best buddies and teamed up to control the economy.
Sounds super efficient. I bet that worked out great for everyone, right?
Yeah, not so much.
Who benefited from this system.
It mainly benefited the fascist elite and their corporate cronies, while everyone else got screwed over.
Figures. So this whole fascism thing, is it just ancient history?
Unfortunately not.
You're kidding me.
There are still asshats running around with these fucked up ideas today.
Really? I thought this shit died out after World War II.
While fascism is largely discredited,
Thank God.
it's not extinct. There are still groups and movements clinging to these ideologies.
Damn. So we're not out of the woods yet.
Nope. They might not call themselves fascists, but they use the same tactics and spew the same hateful rhetoric.
So we've got neo-Nazis and other flavors of this bullshit popping up all over the place, like a bad case of ideological herpes.
It's definitely a recurring problem. These groups often target the most vulnerable in society, spreading fear and hate to gain power.
And with the rise of social media, it's easier than ever for them to spread their propaganda and recruit new followers.
Absolutely.
Damn, that's messed up.
It is, and it's something we all need to be aware of.
Okay, I'm definitely getting the sense that this fascism thing is more relevant than I thought.
It's more relevant than a lot of people think.
But you mentioned this corporatism thing earlier.
Yeah, it's a core feature of fascist economics.
Let's dig into that a bit more.
Okay, what do you want to know?
How the hell did that even work?
It's a complex system.
Did the fascists just waltz into boardrooms and start barking orders?
It wasn't quite that simple.
But they definitely had a heavy hand in the economy.
Absolutely. Instead of outright nationalizing industries like the communists,
Which makes sense given their whole anti-communist shtick.
they preferred to partner with big businesses.
Interesting. How did that work in practice?
They'd offer sweetheart deals, subsidies, and protection from competition.
So it's like they were bribing corporations to do their dirty work.
You could say that. It was this whole you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of deal.
And what did the fascists get out of this deal?
The corporations got to rake in profits, and the fascists got to control key industries and mold the economy to their liking.
Sounds like a cozy little arrangement for the people at the top.
It definitely was.
But what about the average Joe? How did corporatism affect their lives?
For the average worker, it was a mixed bag.
How so?
On the one hand, fascists often boasted about low unemployment rates and increased production.
So there were some benefits, at least on the surface.
They'd pump money into public works projects and rearmament programs, creating jobs and stimulating the economy.
But there had to be a downside, right?
Yeah, but it came at a price.
Okay, let's hear it.
Wages were often suppressed,
Figures.
labor unions were crushed, and workers had little to no bargaining power.
Sounds familiar.
They were basically cogs in the fascist machine, expected to work hard, obey orders, and not complain.
Sounds like a pretty raw deal.
Yeah.
So it's like the fascists were dangling this carrot of economic prosperity,
Right.
but at the same time, they were cracking the whip on anyone who stepped out of line.
Exactly. It was all about control.
Typical.
They wanted to create a society where everyone was working towards the same goal.
And what was that goal?
the glorification of the nation.
Sounds pretty egotistical.
And individual needs or desires were secondary.
So much for freedom and individuality.
Exactly. And anyone who dared to question the system was labeled an enemy of the state.
So dissent was basically a crime.
Pretty much. They used propaganda, censorship, and intimidation to silence any opposition.
What did they do to people who spoke out against them?
Critics were branded as traitors, communists, or foreign agents.
Sounds like a pretty effective way to shut people up.
They often faced imprisonment, torture, or even death.
Damn, that's some scary shit.
It was a very effective way of maintaining control,
So they basically created this atmosphere of fear and paranoia.
where everyone was suspicious of everyone else.
That's fucked up.
It is. But that was the reality of life under a fascist regime. But then it all went to shit, right?
Yeah, their whole make the nation great again shtick usually ends up with a lot of people getting fucked over.
It's a common theme in history.
But let's not forget that these fascist asshats weren't just about brute force and blind obedience.
There is definitely more to their ideology than just that.
They also had a knack for twisting ideas and concepts to fit their agenda.
They were masters of manipulation, that's for sure.
Like they were obsessed with this idea of national rebirth, right?
It was a core part of their ideology.
But didn't they also try to co-opt modernism, which is all about progress and looking forward?
Yes. The paradox of fascism.
It seems kind of contradictory.
It is. It's one of the many contradictions at the heart of fascism.
So how do they reconcile those two things?
They were obsessed with this mythical past, this golden age they wanted to return to.
Right, the whole make the nation great again thing.
But they also recognized the power of modern technology.
Especially when it came to propaganda and military might.
You got it.
So it's like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. Embrace the future while clinging to a romanticized past.
Exactly.
Sounds about right for these asshats.
They were masters of cherry-picking ideas and twisting them to fit their narrative.
Give me an example.
They'd celebrate the efficiency and power of modern industry while simultaneously condemning modern art and culture as degenerate.
Sounds like a bunch of hypocrites to me.
While they were certainly full of contradictions,
But how the hell did they manage to pull this off?
it wasn't like everyone just blindly accepted their bullshit.
Aren't there people calling them out on their bullshit?
Oh, there was plenty of criticism, even during the height of fascist power.
So there was some resistance.
Anti-fascist movements were active throughout Europe,
Good. I was starting to lose hope in humanity.
and they came from all walks of life.
So it wasn't just like a bunch of fringe groups.
Communists, socialists, liberals, even some conservatives who were horrified by the excesses of fascism.
So it wasn't just a bunch of lefty snowflakes whining about freedoms.
Definitely not.
Who were these anti-fascists? What were they like?
These were people who understood the dangers of fascism.
And they were willing to risk their lives to fight it.
Exactly. They wrote books, pamphlets, and articles, organized protests and demonstrations,
So they were using a variety of tactics to fight back.
and even engaged in armed resistance.
Damn badass.
They were true heroes.
So what were some of the main arguments against fascism? What were they calling these asshats out on?
Well, for starters, they highlighted the inherent brutality and oppression of the fascist system.
Yeah, that seems pretty self-evident.
They pointed out how it trampled on individual rights, silenced dissent,
So basically all the things that make life worth living.
and used violence and terror to maintain control?
What else? Did anyone critique their fucked up economic policies?
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's plenty to criticize.
Critics argued that corporatism, while boasting about low unemployment,
Yeah, that was their big selling point, right?
ultimately benefited the elite and suppressed wages for the average worker,
So it's like they were using the economy to enrich themselves and their cronies.
and keeping the workers in line. They pointed out the hypocrisy of a system that claimed to be about national unity while simultaneously crushing labor unions and silencing any form of worker dissent.
Talk about a double standard.
And they also criticized the fascist obsession with militarism and war,
I can't imagine why.
arguing that it would inevitably lead to conflict and destruction.
Well, they weren't wrong about that.
They warned against the dangers of nationalism
A lesson we still haven't fully learned.
and the seductive allure of violence.
So they were basically saying, hey, this whole fascism thing is a one-way ticket to hell.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They saw through the fascist propaganda.
And recognized it for what it was. A dangerous ideology that threatened to destroy everything they held dear.
They were fighting for their lives and their freedom.
Okay, so there were people who saw the warning signs, who tried to wake up the masses to the dangers of fascism.
They were the true heroes of their time.
But obviously it wasn't enough.
But unfortunately not.
Why do you think that is? Why did so many people fall for this bullshit?
That's the million-dollar question.
It's baffling, isn't it?
That's a complex question, and there's no easy answer.
Okay, I'm all ears.
But I think part of it has to do with the psychological appeal of fascism,
Tell me more.
especially in times of crisis.
Right, when people are feeling vulnerable.
When people are feeling lost, scared, and desperate.
Makes sense. They're looking for something to cling to.
They're more likely to be drawn to simple solutions.
And charismatic leaders who promise to make everything better.
That's the classic demagogue playbook.
So it's like they were selling a fantasy, a dream of a better world that was actually a nightmare in disguise. Talk about false advertising.
They were very good at marketing their product.
Those fascist bastards were masters of propaganda.
They used propaganda and spectacle to create a seductive image of strength, unity, and purpose.
Sounds like a cult.
They appealed to people's primal instincts, their fear of the other,
That's a powerful motivator.
their desire for belonging, their longing for a simpler time.
And they played the victim card masterfully.
Oh, absolutely.
Always whining about how their nation had been betrayed and humiliated, how they were surrounded by enemies who wanted to destroy them,
They created a narrative of victimhood and resentment.
which resonated with people who were struggling and felt like they had lost control.
Exactly.
So they were basically master manipulators who knew how to push people's buttons.
You got it.
They were masters of psychology and propaganda.
They understood how to exploit people's weaknesses and insecurities.
Okay, so we've talked about the criticism of fascism and the factors that contributed to its rise.
It's a complex and disturbing phenomenon.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the legacy of this fucked up ideology.
A legacy of pain and suffering.
It's been decades since the fall of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy.
And we're still dealing with the consequences.
So why are we still talking about this shit today? Why is it still relevant?
That's a crucial question.
I mean, it's not like there are any fascist regimes left in the world, right?
Well, not in the same way as in the 20th century.
But there are definitely echoes of those ideologies.
The legacy of fascism is a complex and disturbing one.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
On the one hand, it serves as a stark warning about the dangers of extremism, authoritarianism, and intolerance.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to repeat that shit show.
The horrors of the Holocaust.
It still gives me chills just thinking about it.
The atrocities committed by fascist regimes around the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of dark shit in our history.
They're a reminder of what can happen when hatred and violence are allowed to flourish unchecked.
Okay, so we need to learn from the mistakes of the past.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
There's always another side to the story.
the legacy of fascism also forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
It's not easy to face our own demons.
Okay, I'm listening. Break it down for me.
About the dark side of human nature and about the fragility of democracy.
Damn, that's deep.
It is. For starters, the rise of fascism showed us that even in supposedly civilized societies,
Yeah, like the ones that claim to be all about freedom and democracy.
hatred, violence, and oppression can take root and flourish.
So basically, it exposed the dark underbelly of Western civilization.
Exactly.
That's a sobering thought.
It shattered the illusion that we were somehow immune to the forces of barbarism.
I guess we're not as evolved as we like to think we are.
And it also revealed the flaws in democratic systems.
How so?
How they can be manipulated and exploited by demagogues who prey on people's fears and prejudices.
And those demagogues are still out there, right? Spreading their bullshit and trying to divide us.
Absolutely.
It's like a never-ending battle.
Which is why it's so important to be aware of the warning signs of fascism.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
And to be prepared to resist it whenever and wherever it pops up.
Okay, so we need to stay vigilant and call out bullshit.
That's a good motto to live by.
Got it. But what about the victims of fascism? How
Yeah.
can we honor their memory and ensure that their suffering wasn't in vain?
That's a profound question.
It's something I think about a lot.
I think the best way to honor their memory is to learn from their experience.
To make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes.
To never forget the horrors they endured, and to work tirelessly to prevent such atrocities from happening again.
So basically to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself.
Exactly.
That's a heavy responsibility.
It is. We need to educate future generations about the dangers of fascism.
To teach them about the past so they can avoid repeating it.
To promote tolerance and understanding.
To build a better world.
And to build a more just and equitable world where everyone feels safe and respected.
Damn, that's a tall order.
It is. But it's a goal worth striving for.
Absolutely.
It's the least we can do to honor the memory of those who suffered under fascism.
Well said.
And it's important to remember that Nietzsche was a very controversial figure even in his own time. His ideas were often misunderstood and misinterpreted, and the fascists were no exception. They cherry-picked the bits and pieces that fit their agenda, ignoring the nuances and complexities of his thought.
So they basically took a complex thinker and turned him into a cartoon villain, stripped him of all his depth and turned him into a one-dimensional monster.
You could say that. For example, Nietzsche's concept of the will to power was often misinterpreted by the fascists as a justification for violence and domination. But for Nietzsche, the will to power was a much more complex and multifaceted idea. It wasn't just about brute force, it was also about self-overcoming creativity and the striving for excellence.
So the fascists basically took a nuanced philosophical concept and turned it into a blunt instrument of oppression.
Exactly. They did the same thing with Nietzsche's ideas about morality and the death of God. Nietzsche argued that traditional morality based on Judeo-Christian values was no longer relevant in the modern world. He believed that we needed to create new values based on individual strength and self-creation.
So basically you say that we needed to throw out the old rule book and write a new one.
You could say that. But the fascists took this idea and twisted it to justify their own totalitarian ideology. They argued that they were creating a new morality based on the strength and unity of the nation, and that anyone who didn't conform to this new morality was an enemy of the state.
So they basically took Nietzsche's call for individual liberation and turned it into a justification for collective oppression.
Exactly. They were masters of twisting ideas and concepts to fit their agenda.
Damn, those fascist bastards were sneaky. But you know, it's not just the fascists who try to manipulate ideas for their own gain. We see this shit all the time in politics and religion and advertising. People are always trying to spin the truth to make their ideas sound more appealing or legitimate.
You're absolutely right. It's important to be critical thinkers, to question everything, and to be wary of those who try to simplify complex ideas or reduce them to slogans.
So basically, we need to be bullshit detectors extraordinaire.
You got it. We need to be able to see through the rhetoric and recognize the underlying assumptions and intentions of those who are trying to manipulate us.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about how fascists co-opted and perverted the ideas of thinkers like Nietzsche. But what about their own aesthetic preferences? Do they have any specific tastes in art, music, literature? I mean, they were obsessed with this idea of national rebirth and creating a new society. Did that extend to the realm of culture?
Absolutely. The fascists were obsessed with aesthetics. They believed that art and culture should serve the state, that they should be used to promote their ideology and glorify their vision of the nation.
So basically propaganda disguised as art.
Exactly. They favored a style that was often grandiose, heroic, and monumental. Think massive sculptures, imposing architecture, and dramatic paintings depicting scenes of national triumph or sacrifice.
So like a bunch of art school dropouts who decided to take over the world.
Haha, kind of. They were drawn to anything that projected an image of power, strength, and unity. They wanted art that was easy to understand, that celebrated traditional values, and that glorified the nation. They saw modern art, abstract art, and anything they perceived as being too individualistic or experimental as degenerate and subversive.
So they basically wanted to turn art into a tool of the state, a way to control people's thoughts and emotions. Kind of like a giant fascist-themed propaganda poster.
You got it. They saw art as a powerful weapon in their ideological arsenal. They used it to inspire loyalty, to stir up nationalistic fervor, and to demonize their enemies.
And those fascist bastards were crafty. They knew how to use every tool at their disposal to manipulate and control the masses. But let's talk about something a little more visceral. What about their love of violence? It wasn't just a means to an end for them, was it? It was almost like they reveled in it.
You're right. Violence wasn't just a tool for the fascists, it was a central part of their ideology. They believed that violence was a purifying force, a way to weed out the weak and strengthen the nation.
So it's like they had a hard-on for brutality.
You could say that. They glorified war, worshipped strength, and despised weakness. They saw violence as a test of manhood, a way to prove your worth.
And I bet they had a whole twisted philosophy to justify this bloodlust.
They did. They drew on the ideas of social Darwinism, which justified competition and struggle as natural and necessary. They believed that the strong were destined to rule, and they saw violence as a way to accelerate the process of natural selection.
So it's like they were trying to turn the world into a giant gladiatorial arena.
Exactly. They believed that conflict was inevitable and that the only way to survive was to be the strongest and most ruthless.
Man, that's a pretty bleak worldview.
It was. But it was also a very seductive one, especially for those who felt powerless and marginalized. Fascism offered a sense of purpose, a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves, an opportunity to unleash their aggression and assert their dominance.
So it's like they were offering a twisted form of empowerment.
You could say that. They were appealing to the basest instincts in human nature, the desire for power, the thrill of violence, the need to dominate and control.
And they were very good at it.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to understand the psychology of fascism, to recognize the warning signs, and to be vigilant against its resurgence. But, it's not just about recognizing the dangers of fascism. It's also about understanding the appeal, the seductive allure of this ideology.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many people were drawn to it, even though it ultimately led to so much suffering and destruction?
That's a complex question, and there's no easy answer. But I think part of the appeal lies in the simplicity and clarity of the fascist message. They offer a black and white view of the world with clear-cut heroes and villains, good and evil. They appeal to people's longing for order, certainty, and meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and confusing.
So it's like they're offering a sense of security, a refuge from the complexities of modern life.
Exactly. They promise to restore a lost golden age, to make their nation great again, to purify the world of its impurities. They appeal to people's fears and prejudices, their desire for belonging, their yearning for a simpler time.
And they offer a scapegoat, someone to blame for all the problems, right? It's always easier to point the finger at someone else than to confront our own shortcomings.
Exactly. They demonize minorities, immigrants, intellectuals, anyone who doesn't fit into their narrow worldview. They create a climate of fear and suspicion where everyone is encouraged to report on their neighbors and colleagues.
It's like they're creating a society of snitches and informers.
That's right. They want to control every aspect of life, from the political and economic to the social and cultural.
Damn, that sounds pretty fucking suffocating.
It is. But it's also very seductive to some people. They crave the order and certainty that fascism offers, even if it comes at the cost of their freedom and humanity.
So basically, they're trading their souls for a sense of security.
You could say that. They're sacrificing their individuality, their critical thinking skills, their compassion, all in the name of a greater good that's ultimately a lie.
Okay, so we've talked about the dangers of fascism, its seductive appeal, and the factors that contributed to its rise. But what about the future? Do you think fascism could ever make a comeback? Are we in danger of repeating the mistakes of the past?
That's a question that keeps a lot of people up at night. And it's not an easy one to answer. On the one hand, the world has changed a lot since the days of Hitler and Mussolini. We're more interconnected than ever before, and we have access to more information than at any point in human history. It's harder for totalitarian regimes to control the flow of information and to suppress dissent.
So you're saying that the internet and social media could actually be a force for good in the fight against fascism?
They certainly have the potential to be. They can be used to expose the lies and propaganda of fascist regimes, to connect people across borders, and to mobilize resistance. But on the other hand, we've also seen how these same technologies can be used to spread misinformation, to sow division, and to incite violence.
It's a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be media literate, to be able to distinguish between fact and fiction, to be critical of the information we consume.
Okay, so we need to be savvy consumers of information. What else? What are some other factors that could contribute to a resurgence of fascism?
Well, I think economic inequality is a major factor. As we discussed earlier, when people are struggling to make ends meet, when they feel like the system is rigged against them, they're more susceptible to extremist ideologies.
So basically, when the gap between the haves and the have-nots gets too wide, that's when the trouble starts.
Exactly, and we're seeing that happening all over the world right now. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening, and the middle class is shrinking. This is creating a lot of anger, resentment, and frustration, which can be easily exploited by demagogues.
And I bet climate change is playing a role too, right? I mean, as the planet heats up and resources become more scarce, people are going to be fighting over scraps.
You're absolutely right. Climate change is a threat multiplier. It exacerbates existing problems like poverty, inequality, and conflict. And it creates new challenges like mass displacement and resource scarcity. All of this creates a perfect storm for the rise of extremism.
So basically, we're fucked.
Not necessarily, but we need to be aware of the dangers and take action to address the underlying causes of extremism. We need to tackle economic inequality, promote social justice, and transition to a sustainable economy. We need to build a more just, equitable, and sustainable world.
That's a tall order. But I guess we got to try, right? We can't just sit around and wait for the apocalypse.
Absolutely. We have a responsibility to future generations to create a better world.
Well said. All right, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the history of fascism, its seductive appeal, its devastating consequences, and the warning signs that we need to be aware of. But I want to leave you with one final thought. Fascism is a cancer that can infect any society at any time. It preys on our fears, our prejudices, and our longing for simple solutions. But it's a lie. It's a path to tyranny, oppression, and destruction. We must be vigilant, we must resist, and we must build a better world.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay the fuck away from any asshats who start talking about making their nation great again.
Peace out, motherfuckers.